When you love yourself deeply, the right person arrives. Carl Jung. There is a moment, perhaps you know it well, when you stand before the mirror of your own longing and mistake the reflection for truth. You see there not yourself, but the shape of what you believe you lack, the missing piece, the other half, the completion that surely exists somewhere beyond the boundaries of your own skin. This is where the great deception begins, in that sacred space between desire and recognition, where the ego weaves its most elaborate tapestries of need. We arrive at love's threshold, carrying suitcases packed with hunger, believing ourselves to be pilgrims seeking the sacred when in truth we are beggars at our own door. The heart, that ancient alchemist, transmutes longing into mythology, and we begin to worship at the altar of another's capacity to save us from ourselves. How seamlessly we construct these elaborate personas, masks carved from the wood of our deepest fears, polished until they gleam with the promise of worthiness. Watch how the ego performs its daily theatre. See how it arranges the features of the face, the tilt of the head, the careful choreography of words and silences, all designed to attract what we have convinced ourselves we cannot live without. We become actors in our own stories, so committed to the role that we forget the flesh beneath the costume, the breath behind the lines, the trembling soul that watches from the wings. But beneath this elaborate performance lies something far more profound and infinitely more neglected, the untended garden of the self. Here, in this interior landscape, the soil has grown hard from lack of attention. The seasons have come and gone unnoticed, rain has fallen on closed earth, and the seeds of authentic being remain dormant, waiting for the one person who never comes to visit you. This garden, your garden, cries out not for the love of another, but for the waters of your own authentic attention. It pleads for the gentle touch of self-compassion, the patient cultivation that only you can provide. Yet how foreign this concept feels to the heart that has learned to export its tenderness, to give away its devotion like a merchant selling precious goods in a marketplace where nothing is ever quite enough. Jung spoke of the shadow, that repository of all we refuse to acknowledge within ourselves. But there is another shadow, subtler, and perhaps more devastating. The shadow of our own capacity for self-love. We cast this shadow long and dark, projecting onto others the very nurturing we withhold from ourselves. We become archaeologists of others' affection while our own inner landscape remains an unexplored territory, a continent of possibility we have never dared to map. The cruel mathematics of this exchange reveal themselves slowly. We pour ourselves into the vessel of another's approval, believing that if we can just fill it completely, it will somehow overflow back into us, transformed into the self-acceptance we crave. But vessels, even the most beautiful ones, can only hold what they hold. They cannot create what was never there to begin with. They cannot transform emptiness into fullness, hunger into satisfaction, or abandonment into belonging. And so we find ourselves trapped in the endless cycle of seeking, always seeking, that which can only be found in the one place we refuse to. Look, we become connoisseurs of others' emotional landscapes, while our own inner terrain remains unexplored wilderness. We learn the language of their needs, the dialect of their fears, the poetry of their desires, while our own voice grows hoarse from calling out in a language we have never bothered to learn. This is the great paradox of the unawakened heart. It seeks everywhere but home. It travels to the far corners of others' affection, while the closest territory, the sacred ground of self-compassion, remains foreign soil. We become pilgrims who have forgotten the temple within, wanderers who have lost the map to their own country. Yet in this very recognition lies the seed of transformation. For it is only when we truly see the barrenness of our inner garden that we can begin the patient work of cultivation. It is only when we understand that no external love can bloom, where self-compassion has never taken root, that we can begin to turn our attention inward, to tend the soil of our own being with the same devotion we have lavished on others. The journey from seeking to finding, from emptiness to fullness, from hunger to nourishment, begins with a single recognition. You are both the gardener and the garden, the seeker and the sought, the lover and the beloved. In this recognition, the first seed is planted, and the long, beautiful work of becoming whole begins. And so we arrive at love's most mysterious theatre, where the heart becomes both audience and performer in a drama it has written but never read. Here, in the sacred space between self and other, we encounter the profound alchemy of projection, that ancient process by which the soul casts its unlived aspects onto the face of the beloved, seeking there what it has refused to recognize within itself. Look closely at the one who captures your imagination, who stops your breath with their presence, who seems to embody everything you believe you lack. See how they carry themselves with a confidence you've never dared claim, how they speak truths you've never allowed yourself to voice, how they inhabit their skin with a freedom that both thrills and terrifies you. What you are witnessing is not merely attraction, it is recognition. You are seeing yourself reflected back through the mirror of your own disowned magnificence. This is the eternal dance of the Anima and Animus, those archetypal lovers who waltz through the corridors of consciousness, drawing us toward our own completeness through the face of another. The Anima, that feminine essence within every masculine psyche, whispers her longings through the women who captivate and confound. The Animus, that masculine force within every feminine soul, speaks his truths through the men who inspire and infuriate. They are the internal lovers, the inner marriage partners, the aspects of self we have banished to the realm of other. Watch how this projection unfolds in the theatre of romance. The woman who has rejected her own authority finds herself magnetically drawn to powerful men, seeking in their strength what she has denied in herself. The man who has abandoned his tenderness becomes entranced by soft women, hoping to touch through them the gentleness he has locked away in his own heart. The person who has silenced their creativity falls in love with artists, believing that proximity to expression will somehow awaken what they have refused to nurture within. But here lies the cruel irony of unconscious love. We are attracted to others precisely because they embody what we have rejected in ourselves, yet we cannot truly receive what they offer because we have made ourselves unavailable to those very qualities within our own being. We become collectors of others' attributes, museum curators of borrowed wholeness, forever gazing at treasures we believe we can never possess. The beloved becomes a living repository for our unlived life, carrying the weight of our disowned potential. Like a sacred burden they never agreed to bear. We fall in love not with who they are, but with who we refuse to become. We worship them for their courage while denying our own bravery, praise them for their authenticity while wearing masks of performance, celebrate their freedom while imprisoning ourselves in the cage of shoulds and shouldn'ts. This is why love, in its unconscious form, so often transforms into disappointment. The person we believed would complete us reveals themselves to be magnificently, frustratingly human. They cannot sustain the weight of our projections forever. They stumble, they doubt, they fail to embody the perfection we have demanded of them. And in that moment of their human vulnerability, we feel betrayed, not by them, but by the collapse of our own magical thinking. Yet within this very disappointment lies the seed of true transformation. For when the projection falls away, when the beloved reveals themselves to be as beautifully flawed as we are faced with a choice that will determine the course of our entire relational life. We can flee in search of a new screen for our projections, or we can turn toward the mirror and begin the courageous work of reclaiming what we have cast away. The path of conscious love requires us to become archaeologists of our own projections, to dig beneath the surface of our attractions and discover the buried treasures of our disowned self. Every quality we admire in another is a calling card from our own unlived potential. Every characteristic that repels us is an invitation to examine what we have rejected in ourselves. The beloved becomes not a source of completion, but a mirror reflecting our own wholeness back to us. This is the profound truth that reshapes everything. We cannot truly love another until we have embraced the totality of who we are. For how can we offer genuine intimacy when we are strangers to ourselves? How can we receive love when we have deemed ourselves unworthy of our own affection? How can we stand in the full presence of another when we are hiding from our own magnificence? The journey from projection to authentic relationship is nothing less than the journey from seeking to finding, from emptiness to wholeness, from the hunger for completion to the recognition of our own inherent completeness. It is the path that leads us home to ourselves, and in that homecoming, we discover that we have always carried within us everything we have ever sought in another. And so, we arrive at the threshold that every awakening soul must cross, the sacred descent into the underworld of our own company. Here, in this place that the world calls loneliness, but the soul recognizes as sanctuary, we begin the most courageous journey of all, the voluntary exile from the noise of others' expectations into the profound silence of our own being. This is the nigredo, the alchemical blackening that precedes all transformation. It is the dark night of the soul that mystics have spoken of across centuries, the necessary dissolution that strips away everything we thought we were until only the raw material of being remains. Do not mistake this for mere loneliness, that surface emotion that sends us running toward distraction. This is something far more profound, the terror and the ecstasy of being alone with the truth of ourselves. Watch how the world recoils from this sacred solitude. See how it offers 1,000 distractions, 1,000,000 ways to avoid the one conversation that matters most, the dialogue between who you have been and who you are becoming. The ego, that master of survival, whispers its seductive lies. You need others to exist. You need validation to breathe. You need external proof of your worth to justify taking up space in this world. But these are the very chains that must be broken in the forge of solitude. There comes a moment. Perhaps it arrives through heartbreak, perhaps through exhaustion, perhaps through the simple recognition that the old ways of being no longer serve, when the soul calls for retreat. Not the retreat of the wounded, but the retreat of the warrior, who knows that the next battle must be fought on interior ground. This is the sacred no to the world's demands, the holy withdrawal from the marketplace of approval, the conscious choice to step away from the stage where we have performed our false selves for so long. In this withdrawal, everything we have used to define ourselves begins to crumble. The persona, that carefully constructed mask we have worn to navigate social waters, starts to slip. The roles we have played, the good daughter, the strong son, the helpful friend, the perfect partner, begin to feel like costumes that no longer fit. We find ourselves standing naked in the ruins of our former identities, terrified and exhilarated by the vast unknown of who we might become. This is where the real work begins. In the silence that follows the cessation of others' voices, we begin to hear the whisper of our own authentic voice, so long buried beneath the chorus of shoulds and shouldn'ts that we barely recognize it as our own. It speaks in the language of dreams and desires we have never dared acknowledge, in the vocabulary of truths we have been too afraid to speak, in the poetry of a self we have never allowed to fully exist. The terror of this encounter cannot be understated. For in the absence of external validation, we are forced to confront the question that has haunted us beneath all our seeking. Am I enough, just as I am, without anything to prove or anyone to please? The false self, sensing its impending death, thrashes wildly, conjuring every reason why solitude is dangerous, why isolation is pathological, why we must return immediately to the familiar prison of others' expectations. But something else is happening in this darkness, something the ego cannot comprehend. Like a seed that must first dissolve in the soil before it can sprout, the authentic self is stirring in the fertile darkness of solitude. Fed by the tears of all we are releasing, watered by the rain of our own compassion, it begins to unfurl its first tender shoots toward the light of consciousness. This is the paradox of the dark night. In choosing to be alone, we discover we are never truly alone. In the silence, we hear the voice of the soul. In the emptiness, we find the fullness of our own being. In the darkness, we encounter the light that has always been burning within us, waiting patiently for the noise to die down so it could finally be seen. The dissolution is not punishment, but preparation. The breaking down is not destruction, but deconstruction. The careful dismantling of everything that was never truly us, so that what remains can be recognized as unshakably real. In this sacred solitude, we become archaeologists of the self, carefully brushing away the dust of others' expectations to reveal the precious artifacts of our own authenticity. Here, in the crucible of aloneness, we learn the most revolutionary truth of all. We are not broken people seeking to be fixed, but whole beings who have forgotten our completeness. We are not empty vessels waiting to be filled by others, but fountains of life that have learned to run dry. We are not half people seeking our other half, but entire souls who have been convinced we are fragments. The dark night teaches us that solitude is not the absence of love, but the presence of self-love. It is not the lack of connection, but the deepest connection of all, the sacred relationship between the conscious self and the eternal soul. In this darkness, we do not lose ourselves, we find ourselves. We do not become less, we become more. We do not diminish, we expand into the fullness of our being, and so the false self dies as it must in the darkness of its own making. But from its dissolution, something magnificent is born, the authentic self, patient and eternal, ready to step into the light of its own becoming. And now we arrive at the most forbidden territory of all, the shadowed realm where dwell the aspects of ourselves we have banished, the parts of our nature we have deemed too dangerous, too shameful, too unacceptable to acknowledge. Here, in the deepest chambers of the psyche, lives the shadow, that repository of everything we have rejected about ourselves, everything we have hidden from the light of consciousness, everything we have tried to amputate from our being in the desperate hope of becoming worthy of love. The shadow is not evil, though we have learned to see it so. It is not the enemy, though we have waged war against it for most of our lives. It is simply the unlived life, the unexpressed self, the natural impulses and authentic responses we have learned to fear and suppress. It is the anger we were told was unladylike. The tears we were taught were weakness. The desires we were convinced were selfish. The boundaries we were persuaded were cruel. Watch how the shadow operates in the theater of our relationships. See how it projects itself onto others, how we find ourselves inexplicably triggered by qualities in our partners that we refuse to own within ourselves. The woman who cannot tolerate her partner's anger because she has never learned to befriend her own rage. The man who judges his beloved's neediness because he has buried his own longing so deep he can no longer feel it. The person who recoils from their partner's jealousy because they have convinced themselves that their own envious nature is proof of their unworthiness. This is the cruel alchemy of shadow projection. We cast onto others the very qualities we most need to reclaim within ourselves, then punish them for carrying what we refuse to acknowledge. We become the judge and jury of their humanity while remaining blind to our own. We demand of them a perfection we cannot offer ourselves, a wholeness we have fractured through our own self-rejection. But there comes a moment in every genuine healing journey when we must turn toward the darkness with something other than judgment. There comes a time when we must extend to our own shadow the same compassion we would offer to a frightened child who has been hiding in the closet, waiting to be discovered and embraced rather than punished and banished. This turning toward the shadow is perhaps the most courageous act of love we can perform, for it requires us to acknowledge that we are not the sanitized, perfected beings we have tried to present to the world. It demands that we recognize our capacity for pettiness alongside our generosity, our jealousy alongside our joy, our selfishness alongside our service. It asks us to love not despite our darkness, but because of our wholeness, light and shadow. Dancing together in the sacred choreography of authentic being, the shadow speaks in the language of the forbidden. It whispers the thoughts we dare not think, feels the feelings we have labeled as wrong, wants what we have convinced ourselves we should not desire. It is the part of us that gets angry when we are taken for granted, that feels jealous when others receive what we long for, that wants to be seen and celebrated rather than always giving and serving. It is the aspect of our nature that says no when we want to say no, that chooses ourselves when everyone expects us to choose others, that demands respect when we have been taught to accept scraps. To befriend the shadow is not to act on every impulse or to become selfish and cruel. It is to acknowledge the full spectrum of our humanity without judgment, to recognize that our capacity for anger is also our capacity for healthy boundaries, that our jealousy points toward our unlived dreams, that our selfishness reveals our neglected needs. It is to understand that these so-called negative emotions are not mistakes to be corrected, but messengers to be heard, aspects of our psyche that carry vital information about what we value, what we need, and where we have been betraying ourselves. The integration of shadow requires a fundamental shift in how we relate to our own humanity. Instead of dividing ourselves into acceptable and unacceptable parts, we begin to see the whole as sacred. Instead of trying to amputate aspects of our nature, we learn to channel them consciously. Instead of fearing our darkness, we discover that it holds keys to our power, our authenticity, our capacity for genuine intimacy. For how can we truly love another if we cannot love the totality of ourselves? How can we offer authentic intimacy if we are hiding half of who we are? How can we create relationships based on truth if we are still lying to ourselves about our own nature? The desperate need for perfection that sabotages so many connections arises from our terror of being seen as we truly are, complex, contradictory, beautifully and messily human. When we befriend our shadow, something miraculous happens in our relationships. We stop projecting our rejected parts onto others and start owning them as aspects of our wholeness. We stop demanding impossible perfection and start offering genuine acceptance. We stop performing sanitized versions of ourselves and start showing up as we truly are, flawed, growing, real. This is the paradox of shadow work. When we stop trying to be perfect, we become lovable. When we stop hiding our darkness, we become radiant. When we stop rejecting parts of ourselves, we become whole. The shadow, once embraced, transforms from enemy to ally, from burden to gift, from source of shame to fountain of power. In befriending our shadow, we discover that we are not broken people who need to be fixed, but complete beings who have forgotten our wholeness. We are not mistakes that need correcting, but masterpieces that include every shade of human experience. We are not fragments seeking completion, but entire souls learning to love every aspect of what we are. There is an ancient archetype that lives in the deepest chambers of the human heart, the wounded healer, the one who has descended into their own darkness and emerged not unscathed but transformed. This is perhaps the most sacred of all transformations, the alchemical process by which our deepest wounds become the source of our greatest compassion. Our broken places become the cracks through which our light shines most brilliantly. Look closely at your own journey through pain, and you will see the fingerprints of this archetype. Every betrayal that taught you the value of loyalty, every abandonment that revealed your capacity for self-reliance, every heartbreak that cracked you open to a love more vast than you had ever imagined possible. These were not punishments from a cruel universe, but initiations into the mystery of your own resilience, invitations to discover depths of strength you never knew existed. The wounded healer understands what the untested soul cannot, that our scars are not evidence of our brokenness, but testimonies to our capacity to survive, to heal, to transform, lead into gold within the crucible of our own experience. Each wound we have tended with compassion becomes a wellspring of understanding for others who walk similar paths. Each tear we have shed becomes water for gardens yet to bloom. Each night we have endured becomes proof that dawn always comes, even when we cannot see it in the darkness. But the journey from wound to wisdom is not automatic. It requires a fundamental shift in how we relate to our own suffering. Instead of seeing our pain as evidence of our unworthiness, we must learn to recognize it as the raw material of our awakening. Instead of hiding our wounds in shame, we must tend to them with the same gentleness we would offer to a child who has fallen and scraped their knee, not dismissing the pain, but holding it with such tenderness that healing becomes inevitable. Watch how the wounded healer approaches their own broken places. They do not minimize the reality of their pain or rush toward premature forgiveness. They do not spiritually bypass their emotions or pretend that enlightenment means never feeling hurt. Instead, they sit with their wounds as they would sit with a dear friend who is grieving, present, patient, allowing the full expression of what wants to be felt. This is the radical act of self-mothering that changes everything. To hold our own pain with the same compassion we would offer to our dearest beloved, to speak to our wounded self with the same gentleness we would use with a frightened child, to tend to our emotional injuries with the same care we would give to physical wounds. In this holding, something miraculous happens. The wound becomes a womb, a sacred space where new life gestates, where wisdom is born from the marriage of suffering and love. The wounded healer discovers that their capacity to love others is directly proportional to their ability to love themselves in their brokenness. When we have learned to hold our own pain without judgment, we naturally develop the ability to hold space for others' suffering without trying to fix, change, or minimize it. When we have practiced compassion with our own mistakes, we find ourselves extending that same grace to others. When we have forgiven ourselves for our humanity, we stop demanding perfection from those we love. This is the profound difference between loving from need and loving from wholeness. The wounded healer has walked through the valley of their own darkness and emerged not bitter but wise, not hardened but open, not diminished but expanded. They love not because they need something from others, but because they have learned to fill their own well and now have abundance to share. The wounded healer understands that authentic connection happens not when we present our polished selves, but when we reveal our scars. Not when we pretend to have it all figured out, but when we admit we are still learning. Not when we hide our struggles, but when we share them as gifts of understanding for others who struggle too. Our wounds become bridges that connect us to the universal human experience of suffering and healing, of falling and rising, of breaking and becoming whole. In the wounded healer's presence, others feel permission to be human. They sense someone who has walked through the fire and knows that survival is possible, that healing is available, that wholeness can be reclaimed even after the most devastating losses. The wounded healer's love carries the medicine of lived experience, the wisdom earned through transformation, the authority that comes only from having descended into hell and climbed back out with treasures. This is why our deepest wounds often become our greatest gifts to the world. The person who has healed from betrayal becomes a master teacher of trust. The one who has recovered from addiction becomes a guide for others seeking freedom. The soul who has transformed their trauma becomes a beacon of hope for those still lost in darkness. Our broken places, when healed with love, become the very foundation of our service to humanity. The wounded healer's awakening is the recognition that we are not victims of our circumstances, but alchemists of our experience. We have the power to transform every wound into wisdom, every scar into strength, every ending into a new beginning. In this recognition, we discover that we have been healers all along, not despite our wounds, but because of them. And so we arrive at the most sacred ceremony of all, the wedding that takes place not in the external world, but in the inner sanctum of the soul. This is the mystical marriage that the ancients spoke of in whispered reverence, the alchemical wedding where the opposing forces within us cease their eternal war and dance instead in divine union. Here, in this inner cathedral, we become both bride and groom, witness and officiant, celebrating the profound truth that we are already complete. The mystics understood what our fragmented age has forgotten, that wholeness is not found in the union of two separate beings, but in the sacred marriage of the divided aspects within our own soul. Masculine and feminine, conscious and unconscious, order and chaos, light and shadow, all the seeming opposites that have waged war within us since the dawn of consciousness now stand ready to be wed in the ceremony of self-integration. Watch how this inner wedding unfolds. See how the masculine aspect of your psyche, that part that seeks clarity, takes action, creates structure and moves toward goals, begins to court the feminine aspect, that part that flows with intuition, embraces mystery, honors cycles, and trusts the wisdom of the body. No longer adversaries competing for dominance, they become dance partners in the choreography of authentic being. The inner masculine, when mature and healed, does not seek to dominate the feminine within, but to protect and honor her. He learns to value her intuitive wisdom, to trust her cyclical nature, to celebrate her capacity for receptivity and flow. He discovers that his strength is not diminished by tenderness, but enhanced by it. His clarity is not clouded by emotion, but illuminated by it. His action is not weakened by sensitivity, but guided by it. The inner feminine, when fully awakened, does not diminish herself to accommodate the masculine, but rises to meet him as an equal. She learns to trust her own knowing, to honor her need for space and silence, to celebrate her connection to the mysteries of life and death and rebirth. She discovers that her receptivity is not passivity but power, that her intuition is not confusion but clarity, that her emotional depth is not weakness but wisdom. In this inner wedding, we witness the end of the war between our parts. No longer do we swing between extremes, too much action without reflection, too much feeling without boundaries, too much structure without flow, too much chaos without direction. Instead, we learn the dance of integration, where each aspect of our nature has its season, its purpose, its sacred role in the wholeness of who we are. This is the foundation of true self-love, the recognition that we are not half beings seeking completion, but whole souls learning to love every aspect of our nature. We are both the fierce protector and the gentle nurturer, both the wise teacher and the eternal student, both the one who creates and the one who receives creation. In honoring all these aspects, we discover that we have been complete all along. The inner wedding transforms how we relate to the world. When we have married our own opposites, we no longer project our unlived aspects onto others. We stop seeking in romantic partners what we refuse to cultivate within ourselves. We cease demanding that others carry our disowned feminine or masculine energy. Instead, we enter relationships as whole beings, offering from our fullness rather than seeking to fill our emptiness. This integration does not mean we become androgynous or lose our unique essence. Rather, it means we become more fully ourselves, honoring both our receptive and active natures, our logical and intuitive minds, our need for solitude, and our desire for connection. We learn to be both strong and vulnerable, both clear and mysterious, both grounded and flowing. The alchemical wedding within is not a one-time event, but an ongoing practice, a daily recommitment to honoring all aspects of our nature. It requires us to notice when we are rejecting parts of ourselves, when we are favoring one aspect over another, when we are falling back into the old patterns of internal warfare. It asks us to continually choose integration over fragmentation, wholeness over division, love over fear. In this inner marriage, we discover the profound truth that has eluded us for so long. We are already worthy of love, not because we have achieved some external standard of perfection, but because we are complete expressions of the divine experiment of consciousness. We are already whole, not because we have accumulated enough external validation, but because wholeness is our essential nature. We are already enough, not because we have earned it through our accomplishments, but because enoughness is written into the very fabric of our being. The wedding bells ring in the cathedral of the soul, and we finally understand we are the love we have been seeking, the completion we have been pursuing, the wholeness we have been dreaming of. In this recognition, the search ends and the celebration begins. And now we enter the most mysterious phase of all transformation, the chrysalis, that sacred space between what was and what will be, where the very essence of identity dissolves into possibility. Here, in this liminal realm, we discover that becoming requires a kind of dying, that rebirth demands a dissolution so complete that for a time we exist as nothing more than potential, pure consciousness suspended in the fluid of our own becoming. The caterpillar knows nothing of butterflies when it begins to weave its chrysalis. It follows only an ancient wisdom encoded in its cells, a blueprint for transformation that transcends understanding. So too must we learn to trust the metamorphosis that calls to us from the depths of our being, even when we cannot comprehend its purpose or envision its outcome. This is perhaps the greatest act of faith, to surrender to our own becoming when we cannot see what we are becoming. In this space of not knowing, the ego experiences its greatest terror. Everything it has used to define the self begins to liquefy, to lose its solid form. The roles we have played, the identities we have worn, the familiar patterns of thought and behavior that have given us the illusion of security, all of it starts to dissolve in the primordial soup of transformation. We find ourselves asking the question that has no easy answer. If I am not who I used to be, and I don't yet know who I am becoming, then who am I in this moment? This is the dark night of metamorphosis, where patience becomes our deepest spiritual practice. The ego, desperate to maintain its grip on the known, offers 1,000 reasons to abort the process, to climb back into the familiar skin we have outgrown, to settle for the safety of stagnation rather than risk the uncertainty of growth. But something deeper calls us forward, a voice that speaks not in the language of logic, but in the wordless wisdom of becoming itself. Watch how nature teaches us the art of transformation. The butterfly does not emerge through force or hurry, but through the patient alchemy of time and trust. Each day in the chrysalis serves its purpose, each moment of dissolution necessary for the reconstruction that follows. There can be no rushing this sacred process, no shortcuts through the mystery, no way to bypass the uncomfortable space of not yet knowing. In our human chrysalis, we learn that transformation is not a linear progression, but a spiral dance of dying and being reborn over and over again. We release layers of identity like autumn leaves, each one once green and vital, now ready to fall and nourish the soil of our becoming. We discover that we are not one fixed thing, but a flowing river of consciousness, always moving, always changing, always becoming more ourselves, even as we become something entirely new. The chrysalis teaches us that vulnerability is not weakness, but the very condition of growth. To grow, we must become soft, must allow our protective shells to dissolve, must exist for a time in a state of exquisite sensitivity to the forces of transformation working within us. We learn to find safety, not in hardness, but in trust, not in control, but in surrender, not in knowing, but in faith. Here, in this space of becoming, we encounter the profound truth that we are not our thoughts, not our emotions, not our past identities or future dreams, but the consciousness that witnesses all of these arisings and passings. We are the awareness that remains constant, even as everything else transforms, the eternal self that observes the temporary selves as they dissolve and reconstitute themselves in new forms. This recognition brings both terror and ecstasy. Terror, because it means everything we thought we were is revealed to be temporary, changeable, illusory. Ecstasy, because it means we are so much more than we ever imagined, so much vaster than any single identity could contain, so much more eternal than any single lifetime could express. In the chrysalis, we learn that faith in our own becoming is the highest form of self-love. To trust the process when we cannot see the outcome, to honor the wisdom of our own transformation when the world around us demands certainty, to hold space for our own metamorphosis with the same reverence we would offer to any sacred mystery, this is the deepest form of devotion we can offer to ourselves. The butterfly knows nothing of its former life as a caterpillar when it finally emerges. Its memories, its identity, its very cellular structure has been completely reconstructed. Yet something essential has been preserved through the transformation. The spark of life itself, the consciousness that has been the witness and the participant in its own becoming, so too with our human metamorphosis. We emerge from our chrysalis of becoming not as improved versions of who we were, but as entirely new expressions of who we have always been. The essence remains, but everything else, our relationships to love, to fear, to ourselves, to the world, has been transformed in the sacred laboratory of our own consciousness. This is the gift of the chrysalis, to teach us that we are not fixed beings, but flowing rivers of possibility, not finished products, but eternal becomings, not separate selves, but expressions of the one consciousness learning to know itself through infinite forms. And so we emerge from the chrysalis transformed, no longer the careful curator of others' expectations, but the faithful guardian of our own truth. In this emergence, something miraculous begins to unfold, a kind of sacred magnetism that operates according to laws the ego never understood. When we stop contorting ourselves to fit into spaces that were never meant for us, when we cease the exhausting performance of being who we think others want us to be, we discover that authenticity itself becomes a beacon, drawing toward us what truly belongs in our orbit. This is the profound alchemy of becoming real. As the persona dissolves, like morning mist in sunlight revealing the genuine self beneath, we begin to emit an energetic signature that speaks in frequencies the soul understands, no longer broadcasting the static of our insecurities or the white noise of our people-pleasing. We begin to transmit the clear, strong signal of who we actually are. And in this transmission, those who resonate with our frequency begin to find us, as if guided by an invisible compass that points always toward authentic connection. Watch how this transformation ripples through every aspect of your life. The friendships that once drained you begin to feel hollow, while new connections emerge that nourish you at the deepest levels. The work that once felt like wearing clothes that didn't fit starts to chafe unbearably, while opportunities appear that allow you to express your true gifts. The romantic partners who were drawn to your mask begin to fade away, making space for those who are attracted to your essence. This is not magic, though it may feel miraculous. It is simply the natural law of resonance operating in the realm of human connection. When a tuning fork is struck, it causes other tuning forks of the same frequency to vibrate in harmony. So too with the human soul. When we begin to vibrate at the frequency of our authentic nature, we naturally attract those who vibrate at compatible frequencies, while those who are only attracted to our false notes begin to drift away. The magnetism of authenticity operates on two levels simultaneously. It draws toward us what serves our highest good, and it repels what no longer belongs in our energetic field. This can feel disorienting at first as relationships and situations that once felt essential begin to fall away. But this is not loss. It is liberation. It is the universe making space for what truly belongs to us by clearing away what we have outgrown. Notice how different this feels from the desperate energy of seeking and grasping that characterized our earlier way of being. When we were performing our personas, we had to chase after connection, had to convince and cajole and manipulate circumstances to align with our desires. We exhausted ourselves trying to make square pegs fit into round holes, forcing relationships that felt more like work than joy, pursuing opportunities that required us to betray essential aspects of our nature. But authenticity operates from a place of magnetic attraction rather than effortful pursuit. When we are genuinely ourselves, we don't have to chase what belongs to us. It finds us. We don't have to convince anyone of our worth. Those who can recognize it see it immediately. We don't have to force doors to open. The right doors open effortlessly when we approach them as our true selves. This magnetism extends beyond attracting compatible people and opportunities. It also begins to draw forth from life itself the experiences that serve our highest evolution. Synchronicities multiply. The right book appears at the perfect moment. The conversation that changes everything happens when we need it most. The teacher appears when the student is ready. It's as if the universe itself begins to conspire in our favor when we stop trying to be something we're not and start honoring what we are. Yet this magnetism requires a kind of faith that the ego finds terrifying, the faith that we are enough as we are, that we don't need to enhance or diminish ourselves to be worthy of love and belonging. It asks us to trust that what is truly meant for us will recognize us in our natural state, without costumes or performances or carefully crafted presentations. The fear that arises is understandable. What if I'm not lovable as I really am? What if my authentic self drives people away? What if I'm too much, or not enough, or simply incompatible with the world as it is? These fears have kept us imprisoned in personas for so long that the idea of removing our masks can feel like social suicide. But here is what we discover when we finally take that leap. The people who are repelled by our authenticity were never our people to begin with. They were only attracted to the performance, not to the performer. And while it may be painful to watch them drift away, their departure makes space for those who will love us not despite who we are, but because of who we are. The magnetism of authenticity is ultimately about coming home to ourselves so completely that we become a lighthouse for others who are also seeking their way home. Our presence becomes an invitation for others to drop their masks. Our realness becomes permission for their realness. Our courage to be ourselves becomes inspiration for their own authentic expression. There comes a moment in the soul's journey When the familiar choreography of existence begins to feel foreign against your skin, you have danced the steps that others taught you, the intricate patterns inherited from bloodline and culture, the movements prescribed by collective expectation, and yet your feet begin to hunger for a rhythm that exists only within the sacred chambers of your own being. This is the threshold of individuation, that most profound act of self-love that Jung recognized as the ultimate purpose of human existence. It is not the love that seeks to please or conform, but the fierce devotion that honors the unique flame flickering within your soul's temple. To individuate is to risk everything familiar for the possibility of becoming authentically yourself. The dance begins with separation, not the violent tearing away that leaves wounds, but the gentle differentiation that allows the butterfly to emerge from its chrysalis. You begin to notice how the family patterns move through you like inherited music, how the melodies of your ancestors play themselves through your choices, your fears, your dreams. There is nothing wrong with this ancient symphony. It has carried your lineage through centuries of survival and growth. Yet now you must learn to distinguish between the notes that truly belong to your soul's composition and those that have been layered upon you like costumes in a play you never auditioned for. Watch how the collective unconscious moves through the world like a vast ocean, its currents carrying entire civilizations toward shared destinations. You have been swimming in these waters since birth, following the cultural currents that determine what it means to be successful, beautiful, worthy of love. But individuation asks you to develop your own stroke, to discover the unique way your soul moves through the waters of existence. This is perhaps the most challenging act of self-love, to honor your distinct path even when it leads you away from the safety of the known harbor. Your family may not understand why you must leave their carefully constructed world. Your culture may resist the way you choose to express your authentic nature. The collective may withdraw its approval when you refuse to dance exclusively to its rhythm. Yet this is where the true dance of individuation begins, in the space between belonging and becoming, between the comfort of conformity and the terror of authenticity. You learn to love the parts of yourself that don't fit neatly into any category, the aspects of your nature that refuse to be contained by others' definitions. This is not rebellion for its own sake, but the organic unfolding of what was always true beneath the layers of conditioning. The shadow emerges in this dance as well. Those parts of yourself that your family, culture, and collective deemed unacceptable. Individuation requires you to reclaim these exiled aspects with love, to integrate what was rejected not because it was evil, but because it didn't serve the group's survival or comfort. Your anger, your wildness, your unconventional way of seeing the world, these too are part of your authentic self, waiting to be woven back into the tapestry of your being. As you differentiate, you discover that true self-love is not selfish but sacred. When you honor your authentic nature, you contribute something irreplaceable to the world's healing. Your unique perspective, your particular way of loving, your distinct gifts, these are not accidents, but necessary expressions of the divine creativity that flows through individual souls. The dance becomes a sacred ritual of discernment. You learn to feel the difference between the ego's desperate need for approval and the self's quiet knowing of its own truth. You practice the art of honoring your authentic desires while remaining connected to the larger web of existence. This is not the isolated individualism that wounds the world, but the integrated individuality that enriches it. Sometimes the dance requires you to step away from the familiar circle entirely, to find your own clearing in the forest where you can move to the rhythm of your own heartbeat. Other times it asks you to return to the collective dance, but with new steps, new movements that honor both your individual nature and your connection to the whole. The paradox of individuation is that the more deeply you become yourself, the more connected you feel to the essential humanity that flows through all beings. By refusing to disappear into the crowd, you discover what makes you most genuinely human. By honoring your unique path, you find the universal truths that connect you to every other soul on its own journey of becoming. This dance never truly ends. It deepens and evolves as you continue to peel away the layers of conditioning, to reclaim the exiled parts of your psyche, to honor the authentic self that has been waiting patiently beneath the masks you learned to wear. Each moment offers a new opportunity to choose authenticity over approval, to dance your own dance while remaining part of the larger choreography of existence. The dance of individuation is perhaps the most profound act of self-love because it requires you to love yourself enough to become who you truly are, regardless of who the world expected you to be. It is the sacred journey from the false self to the authentic self, from the persona to the soul, from the collective identity to the individual essence that has always been uniquely, irreplaceably you. There is a profound mystery that unfolds. When you begin to inhabit your authentic self with genuine love and acceptance, the universe, as if awakening from a long slumber, begins to respond to your newfound alignment with a language that transcends ordinary causality. Jung called these moments synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that seem to emerge from the very fabric of existence itself, as if the cosmos were conspiring to support your journey toward wholeness. Watch how life begins to shift when you cease the exhausting performance of being someone you are not. The masks fall away, the pretenses dissolve, and suddenly you find yourself standing naked before existence in your most authentic form. In this vulnerable nakedness, something remarkable occurs. The world begins to mirror back to you the very energy you are radiating from your soul's core. This is not the law of attraction in its simplistic form, but something far more profound and mysterious. When you align with your true self, you begin to vibrate at a frequency that calls forth resonant experiences, encounters, and yes, souls, who recognize the authentic note you are sounding in the symphony of existence. The right person does not appear because you have manipulated the universe with your desires, but because your genuine self-love has created a space in which authentic connection can flourish. The synchronicities begin subtly. A book falls open to exactly the page you needed to read. A conversation overheard on the street carries the precise words your soul was ready to receive. A wrong turn leads you to the doorway you were unconsciously seeking. These are not mere coincidences, but the universe's way of confirming that you are walking the path of truth, that your commitment to authenticity is creating ripples in the invisible fabric that connects all things. As you continue to love yourself more deeply, the synchronicities become more profound, more obviously meaningful. You begin to trust the mysterious intelligence that seems to orchestrate these encounters, recognizing that your willingness to be genuinely yourself has opened channels of communication with the deeper currents of existence. Then, in a moment that feels both surprising and inevitable, another soul appears, not as someone to complete the missing pieces of your puzzle, but as someone whose authentic self creates a beautiful resonance with your own. This is not the desperate seeking of one half looking for its other half, but the joyful recognition of two whole beings who have found in each other a mirror for their deepest truth. This kind of love is entirely different from the love born of need or the love that seeks to heal old wounds through another person. It is the love that emerges when two people who have done the sacred work of loving themselves encounter each other in their fullness. There is no grasping, no desperate clinging, no attempt to possess or control. Instead, there is a dance of recognition, a celebration of the beautiful complexity that exists when two authentic souls choose to journey together while remaining completely themselves. The synchronicity that brings such souls together often feels like a gentle inevitability, as if the universe had been quietly arranging the circumstances for this meeting across time and space. You look back and see how every choice, every seeming mistake, every moment of growth was leading you toward this encounter, not because you were incomplete without it, but because your commitment to wholeness had prepared you to recognize and receive this particular form of love. In this sacred meeting, you discover that loving yourself deeply does not make you selfish or closed to others. It makes you radically available for authentic connection. When you are not desperately seeking someone to fill your empty spaces, you are free to appreciate the fullness of another soul. When you are not trying to heal your wounds through someone else's love, you can offer your own healed presence as a gift. The dance that emerges between two souls who have found each other through the synchronicity of authentic self-love is unlike any other. It is a dance of mutual recognition, where each person sees in the other not a savior or a completion, but a fellow traveler who has also chosen the path of truth. Together, they create something that neither could create alone, not because they were incomplete, but because their wholeness, when joined, generates new possibilities for love, growth, and joy. This is how the universe responds to your authentic self-love, by orchestrating encounters that honor the truth of who you have become. The synchronicities are not magic tricks, but the natural result of living in alignment with your deepest nature. When you love yourself enough to be real, reality responds by bringing you experiences that match that authenticity. The greatest synchronicity of all is discovering that when you no longer need love to survive, you become capable of receiving love as a gift, sharing it as a celebration, and recognizing it as the sacred force that connects all authentic souls in the eternal dance of becoming. And so we arrive at the final mystery, the sacred union of equals, where two souls who have completed the heroic journey of learning to love themselves discover what it means to love another from a place of wholeness rather than woundedness. This is not the desperate merging of two halves seeking completion, but the conscious communion of two whole beings who recognize in each other the divine spark that burns within themselves. The love that emerges from this sacred meeting is qualitatively different from anything you have known before. It does not seek to consume or possess, to heal or to be healed, to rescue or to be rescued. Instead, it offers itself as a celebration of the magnificent complexity that occurs when two individuated souls choose to dance together while remaining completely themselves. In this union, there is no loss of self, no dissolution of the hard-won boundaries that define your authentic nature. The ego that once feared annihilation in love now understands that true intimacy requires the presence of two distinct selves, each bringing their full humanity to the sacred space between them. The persona that once performed love's choreography has been replaced by the genuine self that knows how to be intimate without sacrificing authenticity. Watch how this love moves, not with the desperate urgency of need, but with the graceful confidence of abundance. Each person stands in their own truth, secure in their own worth, offering their love as a gift rather than a bargain. There is no keeping score, no unconscious contracts demanding that love be returned in equal measure. Instead, there is the joyful recognition that love multiplies when it flows freely between two souls who have learned to love themselves. The shadow work that each person has done individually now serves the relationship. The parts of themselves they have reclaimed and integrated allow them to love without projection, to see their partner clearly rather than through the distorted lens of their own unhealed wounds. They can receive love without suspicion, offer it without manipulation, and navigate conflict without the unconscious desire to wound or be wounded. This is interdependence in its highest form, not the codependence of two people who need each other to survive, but the conscious choice of two whole beings to share their lives in service of something greater than themselves. They maintain their individual paths while creating a shared journey. They honor their separate dreams while weaving them into a common vision. They preserve their unique gifts while offering them to the altar of their love. In this sacred union, love becomes a spiritual practice, a conscious evolution of consciousness itself. Each moment of genuine intimacy, each act of unconditional acceptance, each choice to love without conditions contributes to the healing of the collective wound that separates humanity from its own heart. Their love becomes a demonstration of what is possible when two souls meet in truth rather than in need. The union serves not only their own evolution, but becomes a beacon for others still struggling in the darkness of unconscious love. By refusing to participate in the ancient patterns of possession and control, by choosing presence over performance, by offering wholeness rather than woundedness, they create new pathways for love to express itself in the world. Together, they discover that love's ultimate purpose is not personal happiness, though happiness flows naturally from their union. Love's deepest calling is to serve the evolution of consciousness, to demonstrate that separation is an illusion, that the divine expresses itself through the sacred meeting of authentic souls. Their love becomes a living prayer, a daily ceremony of gratitude for the mystery that brought them together. They understand that their meeting was not an accident, but a sacred appointment, orchestrated by the same intelligence that moves the stars and turns the seasons. They hold their love with reverence, knowing it is both deeply personal and universally significant. In the end, they discover that the love they share is not separate from the love they have learned to offer themselves. It is the same love, expressing itself through different channels, flowing from the same infinite source that has always existed within each human heart. Their union becomes a mirror that reflects the fundamental truth that all love is one love, that all souls are connected in the vast web of existence, and that learning to love oneself is the gateway to loving all of life. This is the sacred union of equals, not an ending but a beginning, not a destination but a new form of journey, not a completion but an eternal celebration of the love that has always been waiting to be discovered within the human heart. It is love's highest expression, consciousness recognizing itself in another, the universe falling in love with itself through the eyes of two souls who have remembered who they truly are. YouTube video description. There exists a haunting paradox at the core of human love. We journey outward, desperate to find completion in another, while the true beloved waits patiently within. When you love yourself deeply, the right person arrives is an exploration of this sacred inner terrain through the lens of Carl Jung's timeless wisdom. So many of us mistake the ache in our hearts as a sign that someone else must arrive to save us. We sculpt our personas to attract the perfect partner, pouring our longing into others who carry the weight of our unclaimed wholeness. Yet Jung reminds us that what we seek outside ourselves is often the unlived brilliance of our own soul. This video delves into the profound dynamics of projection, the anima and animus, and the shadow of neglected self-love. It reveals how our romantic obsessions are coded messages from the depths of the psyche, calling us to reclaim the beauty, power, and freedom we have exiled within. We stand at the threshold of transformation when we dare to retreat into solitude, not as punishment, but as sacred preparation. In the silence, we discover that we are both the gardener and the garden, the seeker and the sought. Only when we become intimate with our own depths can we meet another as a whole being, unburdened by the hope they will complete us. Jung's wisdom teaches that true love flows from fullness, not hunger, from conscious self-acceptance rather than unconscious need. Are you ready to meet yourself so deeply that the right person no longer feels like salvation, but like a beautiful echo of your own wholeness? Share your thoughts below. How has self-love transformed your path to authentic connection? Hashtags Dark Carl Jung and Shadow Work, Anima Animus, Individuation, Projection Psychology, Jungian Psychology, and Self-Love Journey, Inner Alchemy, Conscious Relationships, psychological integration.